you don't realize there are people out there who have made careers helping people plan the succession of their business. And it falls so much in that same box of wills, of life insurance, of all the things that we don't want to talk about and need to talk about. Welcome to the More Than Corporate podcast. I'm Amber Furman, recovering perfectionist and serial accomplisher. If you're anything like I used to be, you've been living your life thinking that if you accomplish enough stuff, you'll finally find the success you've always wanted. But what if it's not about accomplishing more stuff? What if it's about accomplishing the right stuff? I believe you don't find success, you create it by intentionally designing the life you want and having the courage to get out of your comfort zone to live your design. I went from doing what I was supposed to do to doing what I love to do, and now I get to help others do the same. Keep listening as I chat with inspiring people who make it their mission to live their best life every day and learn how you too can live the life you've always wanted. Welcome back to another episode of the More Than Corporate podcast. I'm really excited to bring to you today an amazing guest. Nike Anani is an international award-winning entrepreneur, succession specialist, and a legacy planning expert for future-focused business families. She is on a mission to help businesses move from lifetime to legacy, which I absolutely love that concept, and I'm excited to dig into that more with her. As a result of that mission, she communicates, gains clarity to collectively build family enterprises of the future. With over a decade of family enterprise expertise in Nigeria, Nike helps owners lead their family organizations to long-term impact and legacy. Her inside experience as a second-generation family business owner and family office pioneer birthed a passion to help other families in building legacy enterprises that would outlive them. Nike is the co-founder of African Family Firms, a Pan-African association of family businesses that is focused on promoting generational wealth and generational legacies on the continent. She is the host of the Connected Generation podcast, a top 10 family business podcast globally dedicated to next gens that are seeking how to navigate building legacy enterprises while leaving an impact. Nike has a global outlook, having lived and worked in 3 continents. She's a champion for diversity, passionate about improving age and gender diversity and inclusion in business families. And I am so excited to dig into this conversation with her. I have connected with Nike before, and I know this is going to be so incredibly valuable for you. As we're going through the episode, if you have specific questions and you happen to be watching this live, go ahead and comment those questions or comments that you have, and we'll do our best to get those worked into the show. Really quickly, before we jump into this, I want to remind you that this episode is brought to you by Success Development Solutions and the Design Your Life Book Club. I believe that your level of success does not exceed your level of personal development, that we learn and grow through the stories of others and the experiences of others to become the person who can accomplish the goals and dreams that we want to have. If you are ready to step into learning from others in a group of amazing people who are also reading the same books and learning and sharing those learnings, and then also connect with the authors of those books to be able to take that learning to a next level, then the Design Your Life Book Club is for you. Head over to successdevelopmentsolutions.com, click that contact button, and let's go ahead and jump on a call to see if it's a good fit for you. Without further ado, let's go ahead and jump in to this interview with Nike. Nike, thank you so much for coming on the show with me. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Amber.
I'm really curious, before we really dig into your background and all the amazing things that you bring to the table, what is a succession specialist?
Yeah, so essentially someone that's specialized in succession planning, thinking through how can something outlive its existing state. And my expertise is with family enterprises, and often they have to think about succession planning on 3 different levels. If, for instance, mom and dad founded a business and then they transition, they have to think about succession in terms of leadership of the family, because typically they've led the family in the first generation, and then the leadership will move on to the next generation. They have to think about leadership in the business, and they have to think about succession of the ownership of the business as well. So succession planning can get a bit tricky, but it's I find it really fascinating, and I absolutely love it as a field of work.
It's really interesting to me because as a business owner, it's something that we tangentially think about. None of us really want to think about what our demise is going to look like, right?
Indeed.
But we have these clients and these responsibilities, especially as a professional service provider. And for the first time ever, I was in a consultation yesterday where somebody hired me and they asked me, so I know this is going to sound really morbid, but what happens to our case if you pass away?
Mhm.
And there was a time in my life where I would have been really offended by that. Like, what do you mean? What happens? What are you trying to say about my mortality? Right. And then there comes a point in time in business where you start to realize those are things that you have to think about in order to best serve not only your clients on this side of it, but then also to leave that legacy that you want to leave on the other side of it for your family. So I just think it's a really interesting conversation. With that being said, I'm curious what the reception has been for you as you dig into this topic with people. I can imagine it's something similar to trying to get someone to write a will.
Yes, indeed. I mean, typically what happens is the founders, the actual business owners that have established these businesses typically are like, why are you talking about death? Like you said, it can be quite offensive. However, their advisors, however, their children, other people that have anxiety about the inevitable are typically receive my message very well. And then it's thinking through, how can I equip you with the tools to break the ice on a really difficult conversation, essentially money plus death plus business planning for the future, so that you can start having clarity as a family as to what does the future hold. So yeah, mixed bag. Increasingly though, I think the taboo talking about death and money with the rising generation is slowly fading, and there's more of a welcome reception to have these conversations. Younger founders, like in their 40s, tech entrepreneurs that also have a different kind of mindset when it comes to their businesses. It's like, I'm building this thing to flip it and I want to cash out and then set up my family office and invest in a whole bunch of assets. So yeah, it's a mixed bag, really.
I'm interested to know, with the change of what people define success as, moving
Mm,
from a generation where you built a family and then that became kind of the hub of everything, to generations where maybe family isn't in the plans for all entrepreneurs. I
indeed.
feel like in the first scenario, you always had that family that was just kind of expected to take care of things if something happened to you. And in this new business world where not everybody has family in their plans, that's not always there. Do you see a difference between those two mindsets? And is that something that you've experienced? What's your take on that?
Indeed. No, increasingly, I am being pulled into rooms where founders don't have children. We're having kids later and later these days, and some people don't want children. And then it's thinking through, okay, when the inevitable happens, what would you like to see? Would you like to have professional leadership take over the business? Would you want the business to be sold? Would you want some proceeds of your estate going towards philanthropy? Would you want to start establishing that today? I think the general kind of approach towards the whole legacy planning still remains the same. However, the details may look quite differently. So it's not preparing junior to take over the family business. However, in
Yeah.
any case, in these days, it's the statistics is it's only 15% of the next generation want to actually take over leadership of their family businesses. They would much prefer,
Really?
yeah, much prefer to get involved from the sidelines, with family philanthropy or family investing or as advisors to their families. So we're seeing the dynamics in the industry are changing anyway. We're not necessarily seeing like in your traditional family business in the manufacturing plant with mum, dad, and all the three kids fighting like in succession, for instance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, this whole conversation is fascinating to me because it is something that you don't realize there are people out there who have made careers helping people plan the succession of their business. And it falls so much in that same box of wills, of life insurance, of all the things that we don't want to talk about and need to talk about, and all the things that I think if you were to really ask people to be completely honest about whether they have everything in line, if something was to happen to them, they don't. And
Yeah.
that's a scary reality.
Very scary reality. And I've seen the negative impact. I've seen statistics come to life. A friend of mine lost her dad, and it was just horrible. The family's financial future was just gone. There was no
Yeah.
will, there was no life insurance, and what have you. And I think it's so important. We must live for today. It's important to be present in the moment. But I also think we should also have a legacy mindset to ensure that we're protecting our loved ones, so that all the hustle that we put ourselves through, like building our businesses, it's not, at that moment where you're needed, they
Yeah.
can count on you to be there.
Yeah.
And it's hard to go through the process, but honestly, I think it depends on the way you look at the process. I invite my clients to always not think about it as planning, for that doomsday, but inviting the family to collectively think about how can we not only leave a legacy, but how can we live our legacies? So from today, what legacy do we want to be making as a family, not just mom and dad? So it's not centered on mom and dad's death and their transition, and we have to protect the family. That's
Yeah.
included as well. But what legacy as a family do we want to live as well as leave?
Yeah, that's a really powerful conversation, because especially when we start talking about the new generation of business owners that may or may not have family plans in their life, like, we want to know. I mean, I know that I'm one of those people that don't want children. I never have.
Mhm.
And so when you start thinking about what's that legacy that you get to leave, what is my life going to mean when I'm no longer here? And who's going to carry on the message that I've spent my entire life crafting and sharing when I'm no longer here to do it? I think it's human nature to want to know that our life means something. And
Yeah.
you are able to give that to people in helping them plan that succession.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to your legacy. The interesting thing is, the whole conversation on founders that don't have children, right? The next phase of their lives is historically junior follows in senior's footsteps, but often the legacy of senior can be a burden and an obligation and an impediment to junior's freedom, identity, autonomy. So there's also a freedom that comes with, okay, I don't necessarily want to stifle a generation, a person, with perpetuating what was my identity, but I also want to make sure I leave my mark. And that can be in many ways, right? It can be
Yeah.
through gifting, it can be through foundations, it can be through even the business, right? It doesn't have to be that the business will stop because you're no longer around, because there's entire ecosystems that are dependent on you, whether you have employees or not. You have contractors, you've got a whole supply chain that's dependent on you, and you're impacting on communities. So it doesn't necessarily meet the eye, the legacy that you're living today, but
Mhm.
you are certainly living one, whether you're aware of it or not. But we want to also make sure that you also leave one.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how did this happen for you? I can imagine that it's not a situation where you're, 12, 13 years old and someone says, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And you say, "Hey, I want to help people figure out what they want to do when they die."
Yeah.
So, how did this happen?
Yeah, I mean, it was very much from my personal experience. So like I said to you, I grew up in the UK. I'm Nigerian by origin, and my father started off our family enterprise the year I was born. So entrepreneurship has always been around me. And so I moved to the UK when I was 9, so I was quite far removed from it. And then I went to university and trained up as a chartered accountant, came back to Lagos to work in the family enterprise, and firsthand, as a successor, worked with my dad. And I started thinking about how can we build a legacy enterprise, something that would not necessarily just outlive him, outlive me, but even outlive the future generations and really make its mark on our wider society back in Nigeria. And I guess when I was having these questions internally, a friend of mine, like I mentioned, she lost her dad, and I just saw how that legacy just really was uprooted. And the financial protection wasn't there for the family. And it was just devastating to watch her go through grief and also anxiety for the future about finances in a country where there's no social net, there's no security, right?
Yeah.
There's no safety net, rather. And so that was really my prompt to action. Really, how can we start thinking about leaving our legacies and living our legacies to make sure that we protect our loved ones, we make the impact on wider society, because business owners, I really think, are incredible people. They make such an impact in driving value and sustainable change. And I believe business owners have a mindset that can be applied to different spheres of life to not only bring about financial profits and what have you, but also social change. They tend to think outside of themselves and make an impact over space and over time. And that was really when I started getting quite obsessed with this field.
I think that's really interesting. And I'm curious to know, with your business background in the past. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. With your business background in the past, did you follow, like, are you involved in the family businesses as well? Or did you decide to create this kind of as a separate business? How did that work for you in the way the succession played in your family business?
Yeah, so I started firstly doing succession planning for my family. So put together the governance structures, and we affected generational transition and all that within my family. And then I started my consulting business separate from my family. And so I'm the founder of that. And I've got a couple of staff as well to serve other families and helping them navigating similar generational transition.
That's awesome. So you have this book that's coming out the beginning of next year. It should be coming out soon. Do you have an actual release
Soon.
date for it?
I have a pre-launch of the 26th of Jan and a live launch of the 6th of April.
That's amazing. The book is called Lifetime to Legacy. Um, Talk to us about what people can expect in that book.
Yeah, so Lifetime to Legacy, it's the new vision for multi-generational family businesses. And it's really about how can families not just protect the future of their businesses, but also create the business of the future. And I think we all know why that's really important in this age with disruption and technological change, and also social issues, climate change, gender inequities, and even wealth inequalities across the world. How can we ensure that we're creating businesses that would truly be future focused? And through inviting greater collaboration and creativity within our families and within our businesses to unlock diversity of thought, because I really believe that diversity of thought is only present when we have as much diversity and inclusion as possible, and that can take different kind of looks and feels, right? Age,
Yeah.
gender, ethnicity, even geographic location. Like there's subcultures in every country. There's different cultures all over the globe and what have you. And how can we foster that truly inclusive environment that breeds interdependence in our businesses and in our families rather than just independence?
Yeah, absolutely. And what I think is really cool is that you're encouraging these conversations, not necessarily just from the business owner, but also from the family members and friends and employees and coworkers and contractors of this business owner, of, hey, what does this look like? And what is the involvement expected to be? And how can we help you make sure that the vision that you've seen for yourself is carried through? And based upon all the conversations that we've had, I think that it's really interesting to see that it's not just a business owner coming to you and saying, hey, I need to get this figured out. It really is this team effort of everybody involved. And they kind of reach that moment at different paces, I would imagine.
Indeed, it's like you said, it's a team effort. It's not just lone genius, but really collaborative effort. And until there's a distinction in the book, I make a distinction between legal ownership of a business and emotional ownership.
Mm,
And quite often, traditionally, parents will, in their will, say, I want to leave the shares of the business to my kids in equal parts or what have you. And the kids really don't care. They're not attached to it. They see it as an obligation. They want to be free. They want to go to Japan, or they want to, they want to start off their own businesses or go work in Wall Street and be free from this business. And they're just like, right, I might be a legal owner, but I'm not an emotional owner.
yeah.
On the flip side, what you want to create is this emotional ownership from various different stakeholders where they have an emotional bond to it. They have a sense of belonging. They take a sense of ownership for the business and want to go over and beyond to see that it outlasts itself. And that's stakeholder capitalism. We often talk about the one end of stakeholder capitalism, that's the impact it makes on wider stakeholders. But I think we can also invite for the involvement of wider stakeholders in the
Yeah.
building of the business.
Yeah. And, this is something that we see not just on the business side of things, but on the personal side of things too, right? Like when we have an emotional connection to something and we want somebody else to have an emotional connection to that and they don't. And then, people ask me why I don't practice family law. And it is this conversation, family law, wills and trusts. Like there are things that divorce and death do to people and their emotions.
God.
And when there's been this will that's made in the best of intentions, but the emotional attachment came from the person making the will, not the person receiving the
Yeah.
benefits of it.
Yeah.
It creates this tension that was never meant to be
Indeed.
created.
Indeed. I say that we have to have the relational as well as the technical. One without the other won't make sense, like what you're alluding to. So the technical is like the legal documents and the the wills, foundation, trusts, and life insurance. But unless it's built on a foundation of the relational, where we've collectively co-created what we want, it will not be effective. We will lack emotional ownership, and all we'll have is the legal ownership. But I can see why families avoid the relational. It's difficult to have these conversations,
Yes,
isn't it? But we
it
must
is.
have difficult conversations. I think we've also conditioned ourselves as to what is difficult and what it's not, but that's for another conversation. I think we tell
Yeah.
ourselves it's difficult because we tell ourselves it's difficult. We make difficult decisions every day as individuals, as businesses, as as parents, in our professional lives. But for some reason, we said that this is difficult. I think is the labeling that's really a
Yeah.
huge impediment to starting the process.
Yeah.
It's also
It's,
difficult, the implications, sorry, of
no, you're fine.
not going through this
Yeah.
is difficult too. Like my friend,
Mm-hmm.
because I've seen the other end of, she was the oldest of three girls. She had two sisters in the UK at university, and they were paying £30,000 for each of them per year. And dad dies. Mum and sister are scratching their heads. How are they going to keep paying for their school fees? That is difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And we we allow ourselves to get placed in those situations because of that labeling of difficult and also because of the fear that somebody won't be as emotionally attached to something as we want them to be, right? And I feel like that's,
Hmm.
this is just another situation that proves that communication and relationships are really at the base of everything that we do and the success of everything that we do, even when we're talking about what happens when we're not here.
Hmm. I agree. And I think it takes courage, right? Because there's no certainty in the reception you receive by the counterparty, right? And they might just say, yeah, I really don't care about the business, or you can do whatever you want. I've always had an issue with it, might start bringing to the fore personal issues.
Yeah.
But I think it's important that we exhibit this. Brene Brown she talks about how there's a distinction between ordinary courage and heroism, and how in culture we think of, when we mention the word courage, people think of a hero come to save the day. But there's ordinary acts of courage, like waking up, in the morning, getting out of bed on a difficult day, or in spite of grief, pushing through, or if you're fighting depression, choosing to hang in there for a brighter tomorrow, for that business, or showing up in your business as an owner during COVID-19 when everything is upside down. Those are ordinary acts of courage. And we must celebrate ordinary acts of courage and look to exhibit ordinary acts of courage. And I think such conversations are ordinary acts of courage. I'm not sure what Amber's reception will be as I say to her let's talk about this business.
Yeah.
I would love for it to be here in 200 years. She might be, what? That business?
Yeah.
COVID-19, will it survive? But I think it's important that we allow ourselves to bring the fullest of ourselves to conversations.
Yeah, Brene Brown really was onto something when she started talking about this vulnerability and courage and authenticity. And, she was, I always like